In this presentation, I'm going to be speaking about the co-creation of knowledge, with specific emphasis on how to engender safe spaces, or where spaces and situations in which all people are included in the process, as well as the feedback and the continued dialogue. So this presentation will give us a short overview of the collaborative coursework, and will give a little bit of more information about the research project itself. This class and the class project examine the concept of power and resistance. We want to think about these two terms as they relate to our individual identity, our agency, and our ability to act on our awareness of how we can make change or how we can secure things for ourselves and for others. This is because the classroom is always rooted in structures of power. So, in other words, there's always a power relationship that exists between the instructor and the institution and the individual learners, and as the learners themselves and the instructor with them as they go through the coursework. So we want to think about identity not only in terms of how we perceive ourselves in the terms of the course and our relationships with each other, but also how that might extend beyond the classroom. And when we start to think like this, we start to get into an idea of structural agency, where we are able to see clearly what choices we want to make within the structure of the public sector, within the public sphere, and our ability to participate then can lead to action on these goals that we've created as things that are important to us. One way of thinking about participation is that in a political space, how each learner chooses to participate is important. So this way of teaching in our research project allow for the learner to choose how they're best able to evidence their understanding of the content, because they're able to identify their individual skills and contribute that to the larger effort by individual students. So how you participate will largely depend on what motivates you, what you have as far as academic and career goals, and how this might be in line with things that are important to you. This understanding that we've talked about so far is really kind of more understood as open pedagogies or open education. And so we can think about that as one way of engendering safe spaces is to employ a set of practices that are rooted in resistance and liberation. So in order to create safety in a classroom, we have to be living that kind of lifestyle or have that kind of awareness and act on that awareness in a way that develops into a set of practices, and not just a way of thinking about teaching, but a way of actually teaching. And then these kind of pedagogies, or ways of thinking and practicing, are a way of interacting with others that is radically opposed to the status quo power relations, or more simply put, for the purposes of change or for change with students. In practice, I believe this begins with teaching practices and theories that are culturally responsive. These include practices where individual feedback is preferred over a multiple choice score on a test. Participation in the study that students are engaged in and how to design it is also important. And the emphasis on the consequence of the course and the participation on civic learning and the ability to better engage in democracy. Similarly, pedagogy must be open, and so these practices must be visible in a way that the learner is able to co-create learning opportunities. And that means that it's two-way, or that we're in dialogue with each other about what's important to you and how that relates to the course content. And then finally, once the theoretical underpinnings of a lifestyle or the basis of how we are structuring these practices is a way of living that's reduced to language. So in other words, we have a shared language where we can start to examine how these relationships are working as a way of seeing, are we able to produce the kind of knowledge that we're hoping to through our research. And that is something that is kind of an act on our power or our agency to make change, is this ability to develop a language and a research design in order to work on this together. So that concept is called critical participatory action research. And this is our way of collectively researching injustice and power using this methodology. And it's based in critical, meaning critical thinking, abstract concepts, things that are outside of our making sense or our immediate experience. Participatory in that we are deliberating. We're coming up with questions, getting research information on those questions, and then forming some kind of opinion and sharing that with the rest of the group is the participatory aspect of that we often see. And the other side of it is the design. You get to have input on what we're going to be researching, on how we're going to research it, what methods within empirical social science are you going to use. And all these choices will kind of come from your own personal experience in college and before. So one way we could move to the next concept is to think about using digital tools as a way to capture these assignments or these things that you do as a result of our collective research. So this project is going to be documented in two ways. The first is that the final product is a collective of our individual research projects. So we're all studying the same general topic, but each of you have specific cases that you're researching and providing information about, and you'll make judgments and conclusions on your analysis of that data that you've collected in the process of that research. When we edit that down and we make comparisons, we should be able to see a variety of final findings, things that are tested out more than once, more than in one paper, and things that are consistent and point to certain conclusions that we could make about the structure of justice and how it's being perceived by both community members and other people who are part of the system. The other way that we can think about it is the digital structured learning opportunities themselves, whether those be the reading quizzes, the learning materials like the YouTube playlists, the audio podcast on SoundCloud, our video game design project. We have a Civic Engage website and more. There's lots of different ways that the learner can get involved in how they produce their knowledge in a way that can be shared publicly. So there's the aspect of the digital tools that are able to research, that we are able to use to research. There's the digital tools that document our research in process. And then there's the digital tools that we can use to show how our final product evidences that research and the learning. This can also help us to provide opportunities for self-reflection, career or job acquisition through the skills-based approach, the things that you're actually able to learn how to do, like coding, or how to edit and record a podcast, how to shoot and write out a story for a video, or how to do the work that's necessary to create an interactive website. These are things that you can include in your resume as a learner. But then also the collaboration and the work that's done between the instructor and the learners at a more personal level is a model of social relations that considers the classroom to be a good place to exercise democracy or to get people to participate in ways that might be a little bit easier for them, but that at the same way are examining the system from that abstract point of view. And then that's kind of how advocacy is able to become a learning outcome, is that the student has been able to identify how they relate to the system. They've identified ways that they can better use the system and people that are allies with them, and they're better able to overcome any challenges that might be presented to them. And that is our understanding of advocacy in a civic engagement sense. So through my experience and study, this is best facilitated in a structured and a scaffolded dialogue. There must always be the goal of having group dialogue, even if the conditions present make that goal hard or even impossible. What I mean by this is that we must create the structure for dialogue, even if it turns out that that dialogue wasn't able to occur the way we had hoped or at all in the moment that we had tried to structure the dialogue to exist. The structure is the thing that we can keep using in the digital environment, and we can analyze that structure and try to figure out, well, how come it didn't produce the dialogue that we had hoped for. We also have participation as a requirement for democratic discourse. This is, doesn't mean that everybody has to participate in the same way, but everyone must participate in order to have a full definition of democracy. And so this is because we all have to make decisions based on information and based on how other people perceive that information. And these are the relations that we need to exchange in a conversation. And so participation is a democratic feature of dialogue, but it's also a feature of kind of critical participatory action research. So we're studying social relations and we're learning about social relations kind of at the same time. So we believe and assume that our democratic institutions, the legislatures, courts, prisons, and law enforcement, education, and so on, work better if we all work together. Of course, conflict is bound to arise as participation initially increases. Conflict is bound to arise as participation initially increases. This creates new problems for us to adapt to. So as people start to get more involved, and especially if they haven't been involved in the past, there's new issues that will be presented that will have multiple points of view and multiple opinions as to how it should be resolved. In order to resolve the conflict in a democratic and open manner, one must have already designed a structure to anticipate this management and resolution of the conflict. So you can't just do this as a response. You can't do this as ad hoc. It has to be something that's already structured. And again, this is something that critical participatory action research already provides in the research project itself. So D+CPAR provides for ongoing feedback, the element necessary to facilitate an environment where behaviors that lead to conflict are limited. Engendering safe spaces begins with the facilitator, and power is shared with learners, but the burden of power continues to lie with the educator. One must be prepared to guide dialogue through conflict, particularly amidst intolerance. Having a firm belief system, being prepared with thoughtful inquiry, exercising active listening, and engaging in meaningful dialogue with intent to resolve conflict is the defense against intolerance, injustice, and threats that penetrate our sense of safety. There's no question that replicating the kind of dialogue that I am advocating is difficult, but the same principles stated above apply. Having a firm belief system, being prepared with thoughtful inquiry, exercising active listening, engaging in meaningful dialogue with intent to resolve conflict. These are the things that are important when we analyze how dialogue occurs in the digital environment as well. But I think it is important to engage with others and keep trying to achieve the goal of change. And the digital component of dialogue documents these social relations that lead to change. So in a way, we're also studying how to achieve change through social relations structurally. We can always adapt or even abandon certain tools made available through these digital technologies. We are not locked into them. AKA